Good morning, Brandon with High Gear Transmissions, here to talk about the common problems with the AX-5 transmission. They come in the 4-cylinder Jeep Wranglers and Cherokees. This is a rebuilt AX-5. The AX-5s and the AX-15s are very similar. The AX-5 is a little bit smaller. It has a 14 spline, fine spline input shaft. This is an external slave model, and it's got a cast iron center plate. The center plates on the AX-15s are aluminum. They have a 10 spline input, and they're a little bit bigger. This is what the cases look like off of the unit with all of the internals still in the center plate. So, real quick, if you get a unit, whether it's new or used, rebuilt or whatever, and for some reason it's locked up in reverse or it's in reverse gear but you have neutral gate and you can't figure out why or what's wrong with the unit, this is the reverse idler and it's free floating. So what happens is, even though your shift gates are all in neutral, this is falling into gear, which is right here on the 1-2 Synchro assembly. The 1-2 slider and the reverse gear, they mesh up and it creates the reverse. So that's falling into gear, but it's still in neutral gate. What you want to do in order to fix this is pop out this switch plug. When you pop out the switch plug, you're going to get in there. Yeah, it's this side. You're going to get in there, I think it's this one here. You're going to get in there with a screwdriver, you're going to pop it back, you'll feel it go back into neutral gear, and then you'll be able to shift it in and out of gear. So, some of the common problems that we have with AX-5s and AX-15s is falling into gear like I just described. However, AX-5s have a 5th gear issue. Now this is just a dirty core that we busted down to show you. As you can see, we've got busted teeth here on 5th gear, all the way around the base. 5th gear is not very big. One of the most common problems is that it has too much torque. This little half moon snap ring right here pops off, and then this gear comes off the shaft and you lose 5th gear entirely. One of the updates that we have for that is a 5th gear saver. So this has got 2 screws on it, 1, 2, they just pop off, and it clamps here over the snap ring, and it provides a lot more strength so that when you put more torque on it, it doesn't pop that snap ring off. This little 5th gear saver, we put one in every single unit, and they have really cleared up the 5th gear issue. Now, another thing is underneath 5th gear, right here, underneath this gear, has a set of needle bearings. Now these needle bearings are used and dirty. This is the cluster shaft where it rides, and they ride right here. Now this one doesn't look too bad. If you could put your thumbnail right here, you would see that it's a little bit of wear, but it's pretty smooth. Mostly what they do is they get pits and they tear up the shaft. There'll either be wear grooves that are really deep and not usable, or there'll be pits from the little needle rollers going bad. So that's something to look at. Also, another thing to look at is your blocking rings. We replace the blocking rings in every single unit. Every unit that we build gets a bearing kit with rings. We replace all the bearings and we replace the blocking rings because they wear out. They're just brass rings. There's not an update. I don't know that they can be made better, but they wear out over time. So what you do to check is you want to make sure that you've got good gap. If you've got good gap, then you should be okay. If you can hold the gear and turn it, then it's not good. But if you can hold the hold the blocking ring in place and try to turn the gear at the same time, and the blocking ring is grabbing the gear, then you've got good bite and you should be all right. So, back to 5th gear. This is the 5th gear Synchro assembly in gear. It's made into one. One of the things that we always look at, always, is that this slider always goes bad right here. Now, what's going on is when you're engaging it, it comes up to about right here and there's torque applied. When that torque is applied, it wears on that side of the slider. After time, it wears that deep groove in there, and it can start causing issues, jumping out of gear, not holding, vibrating until it comes out of gear, hard shifting, things of that nature. Another thing to look at is where it engages the clutch cone right here. Where it engages, you want to look at these engagement teeth. Now, I don't know how well you can see that, but you can see that these engagement teeth are really worn right here on this side. Alrighty. The fifth gear fork sits in here. There is an aluminum style for the late models and a really early style for the early models. So you can tell if the fifth gear fork is worn. It's got a wear pattern right here. You can see where this is good meat and this is where it's been worn. And if you can put it in there and you've got too much up and down play, then that's not any good. That's something that you want to look at. 3/4 fork is the exact same way. Always check 3/4 fork. They always go bad, and the wear is going to be the same. I mean, you should be able to see it, look at it, and know what's going on. Now, as far as bearings are concerned, you can get by with using the old bearings if you really have to. I recommend putting new bearings in every one of them. This bearing, which goes right here on the cluster shaft, it'll be in this center plate. It's going to fall apart when you take it apart. You can repack them. If the needle rollers are in good shape, there's not any wear, repack it and reuse it if you need to. Not a big deal. If it falls apart, it's not a big deal. Just don't lose them. The front cluster bearing is the same way. However, the bearing kits aren't expensive. I recommend just putting a whole bearing kit and rings and seals in it as well. Now, the absolute most common problem we have is jumping out of gear because of the shifter housing. Now, the shifter housing, as you can see, there's no bushing down inside here. This is what the bushing looks like. If you are having a sloppy shifter, or for some reason it's not shifting into gear, it's popping out of gear, the first thing I would look at is whether or not you've got a bushing. A lot of times what's happening is these bushings, because of the oil, they get old, they get hard. Like this one is malleable, you can move it around, but they get hard, they get brittle, and they break apart. They crumble. It falls down inside the unit. It doesn't tear the unit up, but after a while you won't have any bushing. So I would check that. These bushings are really cheap. You can buy them, put them in your shifter housing, and it'll tighten your shifter up a great deal. This is pretty much everything with these AX-5s. Third gear here and first gear here. Often, if you look underneath where the needle bearing rides, sometimes the bearings will trunnel out the gear where they're basically, instead of the gear spinning on the bearing, the gear and the bearing are staying together and spinning on the shaft, and it eats into the gear. And it's really obvious if you take it apart. You'll be able to see the grooves literally machined into the gear that the needle bearings have made. That's something to look at as well. Now, right here, like I said earlier, where it wears on this side of the engagement teeth, that's a wear pattern that happens on all the Synchro assemblies. I would check every Synchro assembly